Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of HazMat 101 Consultants Spotlight. I'm your host, Bob Koshik-Nano, along with my good friend, bestest buddy, Derek Shaman. How are you, my
Hello.
friend?
I'm doing well. Doing well. How are you?
Good, good, good. So, we got a little different spin, excuse me, for our Spotlight show today. This is um, this is something Derek and I have talked quite a bit about. First, Derek, a little bit about yourself, those that don't already know you, which I can't believe there's anybody out there who may not, but you know.
There's a few lucky people out there don't know me yet. Um, Derek Shawman, currently a lieutenant with the Orlando Fire Department. This month marks 23 years in the fire service. Um, just wrapped up my role as the program manager for Valencia College's Hazardous Materials Training Program. Still teach, but no longer in charge of the program. And other than that, just enjoying every day and the fact that it doesn't snow here.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, this is today is March 20th. If you're listening to this down the road, 2023, and we had to have the heat on this morning and now the air conditioning on this afternoon because that's what Florida's like. So, well, great to have you here. So, Derek and I have been traveling, teaching around the country and whatnot, and one of the things we were talking about over lunch one day was the different levels of, I guess you'd call it required um, hours for hazmat technician programs. I know on the West Coast it's 160. In New York it's 120. Here in Florida it's 160. Other places it's 40. Other places it's 80. There's no consensus on the amount of time, which unfortunately then leads into different levels of training and I hate to say it, but the quality. One of the things that I was actually just saw recently was a it was a video on, I believe it was the National Italian Fire Service or something along those lines, where it's one regional thing where everybody's trained the same. And we're going to talk a little bit here in a few minutes about the different types of hazmat tech programs and where they were, where they've gone, and good, bad, and ugly, quite honestly, with all of it. So, just to kick it off, I was also the program manager at Valencia for a number of years, and Derek took it over. And so we've seen the different levels of training. In a class that we were teaching, one of the critiques was, I wish I had this much air monitoring in my tech class. And we'll get to a little bit more about what we think the hours should be and how things are in just a few minutes. But years ago, to kind of go back a little history, when we used to do the hazmat tech program, it was only 80 hours, and then the state of Florida adopted the 160-hour program, which I think is great. Honestly, I still think it could be more, but that's what you need to have to be a technician in Florida. But that was for us at the institution that we taught at Central Florida was over a 4 week period. And the way we did it, now that was 4 weeks in the class, and it was a week on, week off structure. So really, it took quite a bit of time, but it also helped with, I think, the learning aspect of it because they had teacher and students hands-on, face-to-face interaction. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that it's every class is a little bit different because depending on the group of students you have different skill levels when they're coming into the class, but you also have new questions that get brought up in every class, and those can sometimes lead to a different a different path in the discussion, and it not only can shed some light on something for what the students might have not fully understood, but it also gave a lot of feedback to the instructor as to how well is my message being received? Do I need to adjust my message for the class? Or even just, hey, that's something I never thought about. Let me do some more research as an instructor and see, is there something to this other idea that someone has brought forward? I think that the reduction in in-person hours that we're seeing now, we've sacrificed a lot of that.
Yeah, and it so kind of where we were going again, an institution that we taught at, we had the hands-on part. Then we went to what was called a hybrid because that's what the new trend was at the time. And they're just going to give you some statistics here shortly, but that was more of a week on week off format as well. But it was you were doing more hands on and then doing online and kind of back and forth so that you could follow up the following week. And then there's other places that do everything's online except for the last 60 hours, 40 to 60 hours, depending on the institution and how they do it. And then unfortunately, you waste, in my opinion, because I've taught that one as well, you waste a whole day, day and a half trying to answer questions from the previous weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said 40 to 60 hours for the last portion. I mean, there's some programs out there right now that the only hands-on is actually occurring over 32 hours. That's the lowest number I've heard. But it seems
Wow.
like the average is between 32 and 40 hours for a lot of the hybrid programs, which, I mean, we have to ask ourselves the questions of while we may be accomplishing goals on a piece of paper, are we putting out quality, competent technicians? There's always going to be those driving factors of the balance between the cost for facility usages, the cost and impact to the agencies, to the students, all those things. But the reality is, like you were saying, originally, at least in the state of Florida, we were doing HazMat 1, 2, and then site ops, and then chemistry. So we were doing four separate classes um, that realistically were coming out to about 160 hours anyway before the 160 standard came about. Um, and that was back when our detection capabilities, we didn't have FTIR, Raman,
Right.
we didn't have uh, high pressure mass spectrometry. We didn't have all these other emerging technologies. And it seems counterintuitive that as we have expanded the skill set and knowledge base of technicians, that we're reducing the amount of actual contact hours with this new technology that realistically a lot of it came from college and research laboratories and has been repackaged for hazmat technicians to use. And let's be honest, in the fire service, we're dealing with high school or maybe associate's degree level education. And we're trying to use a technology that people go to 4 years of college or longer to really understand. And while we may not need to understand it at the same level that they are, because a lot of it has been automated for us, we're not button pushers. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people think that we're just going to push a button and the machine's going to do the work. But if you don't know how the machine is working, if you don't know what the results are actually telling you, you're just waiting for a display, we can really find ourselves failing in our mission because we're making assumptions that aren't based on facts because we don't really understand the material.
Right. And one of the things Derek and I talk about in some of the classes and conferences we do, especially in our air monitoring class, is that, the beep is the idiot buzzer, right? It's saying, "Hey, idiot, look at me. I'm trying to tell you something and you're not paying attention." And too many people have relied on the beep or the easy button. Um, there's devices out there. We won't name any, but there's a lot of them. And this is the trend that a lot of them are going to. Is it's a simple couple clicks of a button and it gives you the display of what it thinks it is. But have you done all the other things to get there? It's like when we talk about in our classes about, you got to remember those that run EMS, and I know I use those three letters, EMS, um, but it's BLS before ALS, so it's ops before tech, and even a technician, you got to follow the basics to get to where you need to be. You can't just go right to the advanced stuff because you know how to push 4 or 5 buttons. That's great, but after those 4 or 5 buttons, do you know how to interpret what it is you're looking at? And that goes to what you were saying about some of this stuff is such high tech that there should be a lot more classes involved. But with that aside, we got people that don't even understand how to use a 4 or 5 gas meter. Going back to our original, the beginning conversation of they're not having enough time, hands-on time in the classroom with the basic instrumentation, let alone the advanced stuff.
Well, and it also comes back to your comment about BLS before ALS, and if we equate that to HazMat, it's operations before technician. And what I've experienced, and I know you've experienced the same thing going out when we're teaching, is we have a lot of people who were certified at the operations level when they finished fire standards, but they really didn't maintain that skill set.
Yep.
So then when they're transitioning to a tech level class, a lot of that is actually spent reinforcing things that an operations level person should actually know. Operations level should have a fundamental understanding of decon, of basic PPE selection and use and how that PPE works. And the reality that we're finding out there is a lot of them don't. A lot of departments are saying, our operations level people will handle decon. Well, decon is the most critical aspect for your responders as far as your technicians going down range. If as a hazmat technician and the hazmat officer, I selected the right suit based off of compatibilities and we made all the right decisions and no one's suit was breached and we didn't go beyond breakthrough times, things like that, where's the exposure going to occur? It's going to occur during decon if decon is not performed properly. And we're tasking decon to operations level people who maybe didn't get even sufficient decon when they first got certified, but even if they did, how well are they being retrained and getting that continuing education, especially with changes in decon, as we're going to dry versions of decon, electrostatic, wipes, all these different things. Are those operations people receiving that same training so that when the call does come in and that those skills have to be performed, they're actually competent in it and keeping the technician who was in essentially the safest environment possible inside of their PPE. It's once we're breaching that PPE to remove them in decon that if the operations level person doesn't understand their task, doesn't do it properly, that's where the exposure is going to occur. And same thing for decon of our victims, of our patients. We're relying on operations level to do that. So really, it's a fundamental concern from operations and tech, and even going down to the awareness level for your maybe your transport, your private ambulance crews, things like that. We have to evaluate is the cost savings and the time savings for pushing a lot of things to an online format, a lot of that training that way.
Right.
Um, is it giving us the value in response capability and competence? And not saying that you can't do anything online, but there's a fine breakover between what can you virtually learn how to do
Yep.
versus actually putting my hands on it and doing it.
Yep. Exactly. And that's something we've come across a lot in our ops review classes that everything that they've done was online, whether it was their their new 4 or 5 gas meter that a lot of operation level people have now. Hey, here's a PowerPoint, watch it. Here's a PowerPoint on decon, watch it. And I understand the whole COVID thing, and we had to do a lot of things online. We're past that now. It's time to get back to getting butts in the seat, going over information, and having that interaction between the instructor and the student. So you have the stats that we talked about from years ago, because
Yeah, well,
we
this is from a survey that we did back in 2015, prior to going to the hybrid format.
and ours was
Todd
like
and
a
I
was like
wanted
a
to,
hybrid format, right? Because like the
right,
hybrid format was what was it? That was the 100 hours online and 60 in the in the classroom, 60,
right.
whatever.
So this was based off of where we were with the old 160-hour format, where we did 160 contact hours. So the week on, week off that you were talking about. It was a survey that we sent out to Central Florida HazMat team. So obviously the reach was only to Central Florida. Um, but based off the responses we got, we just wanted to find out as we were making this push to explore the hybrid training options was how do our students feel about what they were currently receiving? Because a lot of this push was some of it from the firefighter side, but a lot of it was more of agency driven because it was a cost to the agencies both in time and those that pay their personnel to attend classes. It was a cost in hours for them to be in the class for 160 contact hours. So we wanted to find out, being instructors and in all honesty, not caring about those costs. We're caring about the quality of the education.
Right.
We just wanted to find out what our students felt about the quality of what they were getting with 160 contact hours. Um, so, just to give you some information here, we received feedback from people, technicians in Seminole County, Volusia County, Orange County, Osceola County, um, and I believe also Lake County. We had some technicians participating in that. So
So just
one
so
of the
everybody
first questions,
understands, these are like the major hazmat teams in Central Florida.
right? All these agencies have at least one. All these counties have at least one team that's receiving state funding. They're receiving Shish Gap, UASI, things like that. They're regional assets. Um, so the first question that we asked them was the classroom and lecture time. Was it too short, just right, or too long? Um, Our respondents, 11% said that the classroom time and lecture time was too short. So 11% said too short, and then another 48% said it was just right. So that left only 41% saying that it was a little bit longer than they wanted, that it could have been reduced. So that gives us 59% of our students were saying that the lecture time was either just right or even too short. And that's when we were doing 160 hours of classroom-based content, whether it was classroom lecture or classroom going out and doing those skills, like learning the skills, tabletop scenarios, putting hands on instruments, things like that, prior to going out and actually doing the physical skills, the practical skills. So right there, the question was asked, with going to this hybrid solution, um, were we trying to fix a problem that our students literally were saying doesn't exist? Our students were actually asking for either the same or more classroom time, not less. Um, but again, we wanted to gather information. We asked about the practical time, the hands-on time that was spent during those 160-hour classes. Um, we had 79% of our students said that the hands-on practical time was too short. They wanted more practical time. And this was where, with the 160 contact hours, when we did the calculations on our lecture time versus our hands-on time, we were at over 80 hours of actual hands-on skills in that 160-hour class. So
Right.
it wasn't like we were doing half lecture or a majority lecture. Less than half the time was just lecture and presentation. The majority of it was skills, whether that be hands-on chemistry, we're actually doing something, hands-on air monitoring, and then going out doing the skills with the leak control, spill, all that, and then scenario-based settings. So
Well,
we
and
actually had 0% of participants saying that the hands-on time was too long.
right, and to put it in perspective, I mean, what are firefighters? We're hands-on people,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, we're not the ones that want to sit in a lab coat in a lab 8 hours a day for weeks on end. We want to get out there and do it. That's what we do.
Yeah, yeah. I, I don't want to hire someone to cut down the tree that's 4 feet from my house, knowing that most of their knowledge of chainsaw work was online. I want to
Right.
know that they've actually gone out and cut some trees, and they know how to have the tree fall in a certain direction and how to set up ropes or whatever they need to do so it doesn't fall on my house.
Right.
Um, the next question we asked them was, does your department provide any agency-specific training on hazmat procedures and or the equipment that your specific team carries? Because that was always the expectation was, well, this is the minimum standards of hazmat. You're going to go back to your agency and receive additional training prior to being assigned to a team. So we asked that question, are you receiving this prior to being assigned to a team? Now, this was a mixture of people who were currently assigned to a team, um, people who had been assigned to a team and had since left a team, and those who were waiting to be assigned. Out of those, we had 48% who said that they received any training whatsoever prior to being assigned to a team.
So
The
just
other
under half.
Yeah, the other 52% said that they received absolutely no additional training prior to assignment. So these were basically people who it could have been the day that they received their certificate from completing the hazmat technician class, their next duty shift, they may have been assigned to the hazmat team and ready to potentially be sent downrange to handle a call, even though they didn't have an opportunity to go over their department's SOPs, SOGs, or even go over the specific equipment that their department carries, because obviously we didn't carry every single manufacturer, every single tool, every single thing. We carried what was required by the standard for the training manual. Um, so that causes some concern that there's a very limited aspect of what we're showing them, but then we had people who could turn in their certificate, and as far as their agency was concerned, you're good.
Yeah.
We don't need to give you any additional training prior to assigning you. The next question was, how well do you feel the course prepared you to perform in a major hazmat incident? Now, remember, this was based off of our 160-hour contact program, where more than half the class was hands-on, and we also did 4 days of scenario-driven
Right.
training, where we started,
Multiple
crawl,
scenarios
walk,
in a
run.
day.
Yeah, we worked our way up to their final scenario, which was a full day long. Oh my gosh, the world is coming apart.
Right.
And the response on that was we had 9% of people that said that when they finished the class, they felt confident that they could function and perform on a hazmat incident with no additional uh, scenario based or skill based training. Another 74% said that they would require some additional training prior to feeling comfortable with operating in that role. And 17% said that they did not feel ready to function without additional training at the agency level. So we're showing that while we're doing everything we could within the constraints of time that we had, even then, people needed some additional training. But the push and the trend was we're going to reduce the amount of hours that we have with them. One of the last ones that we had here was, does your department require a skill assessment prior to being assigned as a hazmat technician? Um, Obviously, as instructors, we do our feedback forms, we fill out task books on the personnel who are going through the class, and we send those with them back for them to get their certifications. Um, but as any instructor knows, there's always going to be the students who kind of coasted through class. They were what I like to call the shadow. They were always in the general area and maybe looking like they're doing something, but realistically, their participation level was not where it should have been, or they may have completed the training requirement, but were not truly competent in that skill. We could mark those things in our evaluations and things like that, but ultimately, did they complete the requirement of the class? Yes. So we do have to certify them. They're just not as skilled or as competent as others. Um, so the question was, does do the departments these people go back to assess their skills to find out, hey, do you actually know this? And one of the questions that was raised was, and Bob had this experience where how long has it been since someone performed this skill before
Yeah.
being assigned? So I'll let you share your story on that one.
Yeah. So before I get into that story, part of the problem is that, and this is not just our agency, there's other agencies around the country, that people go to school to get certain certificates so they can get on certain rigs. A lot of rigs are multitask, some aren't, but that's the bottom line, and that's something that Derek and I came across many times, as was the incident. So the story in which I'm about to tell, where I had nice guy, I still respect him. Call him a friend. Was floated over to me to drive Tower 9 one day because he had the little H next to his name, and that signified for us that he was he had the HazMat 160, but he was not a paid member of the team. Otherwise, he would have had a big H next to his name on the roster. So they sent this individual to drive me that day, and we were going to a HazMat call, and he said, "Hey Lou, I got to be honest with you, I haven't touched a meter in 6 years since we had the class. 6 years, because there was no follow up with our agency, no testing, and we fought this for years and years and years. And actually, we tried about 2 years before I left, so that's would be 6 years ago now total, to do a pilot program whereby these individuals who had the 160 class were annually tested to keep up that certification. And to this day, that's still not being done. So if you have people, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but if you have people that have this class, they have to be tested annually, whether they're on the team or not. Because how else are you going to know they're ready when they get transferred or they're pulled in for a call one day or what have you?
And this is where, and again, this isn't focusing on any one agency because this is what we found through our survey of multiple agencies.
Oh yeah, multiple.
And even in our teaching, going around having opportunities to go around the country, it's a national problem. Of There are some departments that are doing a really great job of
Yep.
saying, hey, if you've got this certification, we're going to maintain it. But it seems more often than not, it's usually there's no requirement for that continuing education, which it really kind of gets into that sticky area with OSHA and NFPA. They both have recommendations for annual refresher training, and they recommend that you should have some sort of training that's commensurate with the skill level and the tasks that are going to be performed. But what we've seen with any kind of standard or regulatory thing is a lot of times there's the caveat of the AHJ. The AHJ authority having jurisdiction determines who is a technician, determines the training level, those things, which obviously every agency should be able to kind of say, well, these are our hazards, these are our concerns. So we're going to focus kind of in these areas, and this is the amount of training our team needs because maybe we're not a team that does burning, or maybe we're a team that only does hydrocarbon spills. So yeah, the training is going to be different for everybody. Um, but the problem comes into, are we still fulfilling the spirit of those when it transfers that responsibility to the AHJ of, are we actually maintaining competence with that? And there's nothing in, if you look at the OSHA standard, nothing says that it has to be um, you're assigned to the team and you're receiving these. It's if you are certified as a hazmat technician or operations level or awareness, in order to maintain that level of certification, you're supposed to receive annual training. So then the question that gets raised, especially in the fire service aspect, is if someone took a technician course 6 years ago, like the person that you had, if they have done no additional technician level training over the last 6 years, in the spirit of refresher training and the intent of those standards and regulations, are they really still a technician? And we
Not in
could
my book.
argue that we could give them a refresher training and do that, and that's where this competency prior to being assigned would come into play. And I know, reading some interpretations from OSHA, there have been questions asked. We had someone that's been 18 months since they had any refresher training. And OSHA does say, if you give them training at this point, yeah, they can still be certified. But I think OSHA even was drawing the line at 2 years. If you went 2 years without any continuing education, they their recommendation was that that employee would go back through the entire program.
Yeah, I think that's
Um,
right.
and what we were seeing here, just to get the last results off the survey here, um, does your department require a skill assessment prior to being assigned as a hazmat technician? Um, Only 13% of respondents said that their department requires a skill assessment. That that causes some concerns as far as, again, are we fulfilling our duty? Are we fulfilling the contract that we have to our communities of we are a response team ready to handle this problem? Are we doing what's best for the community from a safety factor? Even our responders, are the technicians that our agencies have, are they truly performing in a safe manner based off of the level of education and competence that they've developed? And it's not to cast stones at agencies or regulatory or any kind of oversight or anything like that, or even at the individual, but there needs to be some sort of guide rails put in place, in my opinion, as to you have to do something to maintain your skill set. It has to be documented, and there should be an evaluation prior to being assigned to that role of are you truly ready for that role and going to be able to perform in a way that keeps you safe, completes the mission, and keeps the community safe.
Right. Exactly. And the other thing too is that we've gone on so long that nobody's done the follow up. Everybody's good with the minimum standards of stuff. Well, the problem with that is that do you want the minimum paramedic arriving at your house when your family's sick? I mean, we're okay with minimum. Do you want the minimum amount of a fire truck to show up to put your house out? You know, we've become a minimal type world, I guess, for lack of a better term, for whatever reason, and we need to get back to doing what needs to be done properly because we're supposed to be professionals. I want the best showing up at my house, my business, whatever, because it's my emergency.
Yeah, and the question has to be asked. I mean, there's obviously the constraints on there's pull in all directions in emergency response, especially the fire service aspect of it. We have fire training that we have to do. We have EMS training for those EMS based agencies. You have compliance training for any kind of accreditations that you have. You still have your public education and your public engagement that you want to do. So the calendar is definitely full. Um,
Right.
so then the question is, is it the agency's responsibility to maintain their team members? And the answer to that would be 100% yes.
Right.
Now, people not assigned to the team, is that the agency's responsibility? I could kind of go either way on that. It could be, yeah, the agency wants to have these people in reserve. They should be able to provide some sort of continuing education, even if that continuing education is only online training. At least it's something.
Right.
Or do we ask and say, are there other options for those people to go out, whether it's through their LEPCs offering free training, conferences, whatever other options are out there, maybe even the colleges, the training facilities offering 16-hour refresher classes, something where people can just put their hands on equipment, put suits on, run through some of the skills,
Exactly.
just to try to maintain that competency. But it all is still falling back to you're as good as the foundation that you were built on.
Right.
If we invest more time on the front end, a lot of those concerns are lessened over, for the continuing education. Because if the person didn't get the adequate education on the front and didn't get the adequate time to develop those skills that they can instead maintain and sharpen
Right.
versus I really didn't understand that, but I got a certificate.
Yeah.
So
Eh,
now my ability to continue on my education is hampered by my limited understanding. We really got to fix the initial training.
oh, absolutely. And that's where getting back to the original point and when we first started the conversation was a nationalized type of criteria that has to be met. Not this area of the country does this area of the country does that. There needs to be a standard all the way across the board. And I've said this for years. If there's a standard for FEMA USART teams, well, they're all supposed to be trained at a certain level, then why are we not doing that for fire department teams? Why are we not doing that for fire academies? Why are we not doing that across the board? And I think that will help a lot of this. And two, again, we're not bashing online training or anything like that. That's not what we're saying. But there's a time and a place, and what we're finding in our travels is there's been too much dependency on online training, online conferences, online just classes in general, what have you, without the proper follow up with hands on. And when we go around and we teach them, they say, hey, listen, this is great. We haven't had hands on training in so long. You got to kind of wonder. I mean, again, I get it. COVID set everybody back, but we're past that now. So now we got to get out of that mentality that this is all we know and this is how we do it, and go back to, as I said before, butts in the seat, hands on the gear. It's
Yeah,
it's just that simple.
yeah, and like you said, online training is a fantastic tool.
It can be
It's
absolutely.
supplemental training. Online
Exactly.
training for a task that is a practical hands-on task, you can't fulfill the requirements of learning that skill online.
Right.
There has to be a balance, and if the skill that has to be performed is something that I am physically doing, then at the bare minimum, half of that training should be you physically doing that
Right.
skill.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
because you have to build the muscle memory. You have to be able to, at 2 o'clock in the morning, on a moment's notice, perform that skill
Right.
without hesitation because you've gone through it enough times. You've built that muscle memory. And I believe that the online aspect is a great way to introduce a concept and then you come in and you demonstrate the skill.
You
You
reinforce it.
hone that. And
Yep.
that was what, when we were developing our hybrid program for the college, that's how we set up ours. We looked at some other models out there, and like Bob was saying before, there were models where everyone did the entire online program, and then they came in for anywhere between 40 and 80 hours for hands on at the
Yeah.
very end.
Basically, the last week of class.
Yeah. Which the problem with that is we all know the reality is that when with anything online, there's people who are going to put in the effort
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to do the reading on their own, they're going to do the studying, and then there's going to be those who go to an online resource. I won't name the most popular one because it is a great resource when it's used for what it's designed for.
Right.
But there are people who will go there, they find the answers, and they answer questions, and they're watching TV the entire time that they're taking
Yeah.
an exam because the answer's right there in front of them. So we're saying this person is demonstrating competency through this online portion, but they really aren't. They're just copying answers from the internet and putting them in place um, versus use the hybrid aspect, the online aspect, the virtual aspect to present a concept and prepare them for what they're going to do on the actual practical portion of it. And then they come in and reinforce it.
Right.
So when we set up our program, we did they and when I left Valencia, it was still like this. They would do a week online, and they would cover 3 chapters, and then we would follow up with 2 days of practical application of those 3 chapters. And that's what it was. It was 3 chapters, then 2 days practical, and then it started reducing to where it was 3 chapters, and now we're expanding to 4 days practical. So when all was said and done, the 160-hour hybrid program that was intact when I left was realistically 96 contact hours
Right.
And the nice thing was is we did get away from some of the monotonous lecture aspects of it because they were able to do it online. So there was the benefit in that aspect. Some of the things that I 100% agree, you don't have to be in the classroom to learn, but even when they were coming in and we were applying those practical applications, we still found that there were people who weren't really getting it because what they thought they understood from reading the book and completing the online tasks wasn't really applicable or being applied properly by that individual student or maybe a
Right.
handful of students, where some had the aptitude to understand it. We have to understand all of our students have different aptitude levels. They all understand information differently. There's visual learners, there's audible learners, there's hands-on learners. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. When we have all the students in front of us, that's when we can look out into our audience basically as instructors,
Right.
and you can see the people that's clicking for, and then you see the ones that are maybe asking their neighbor, hey, do you understand what this means, or the ones who are just the deer in the headlights.
Right.
And we could accommodate that, we could address that, we could reinforce and make sure before we moved on, does everyone in this room understand this concept?
Right.
And I think that that's what the online aspect uh, misses a little bit. We try to have classroom engagement by doing online forums. I know there's some groups out there that they're doing video meetings. I think that the video meetings are actually really good. Um, but like the online forum posts, again, it's someone writing something about an assignment that he gave them. They're doing a book report
Right.
basically.
Book
And
report.
then it's like, well, you have to comment on two people. And then you get the person who's like, I really appreciate the way that
Yeah,
you,
and
it's like, come
it's
on,
the same thing
make a
over again.
legitimate comment, something that adds to the
Right.
situation. Because we're trying to get that. We had that forum when students were in the classroom.
Right.
That forum was natural, organic discussion that occurred that could maybe even take you away from the topic
Right.
into another realm, but related one way or another. You could see how those lines intersected.
Right.
Um, that it's really concerning that we've lost that
We've
tool.
we've lost that ability, and unfortunately we need to get back to it. But here's, and I hate to even say it, but this is what's going to happen. It, do you want to spend, and I say this to entities out there, do you want to spend, just throw out a number, $2,000 for somebody to get trained, or $200,000 for a lawsuit? Because that's essentially what's going to happen. You're gonna pay one way or the other, and this isn't, for people trying to make money teaching classes. This is to get your people trained. What is the cost of somebody's training? There's free classes out there. You don't even have to pay for stuff. Now, you and I went to a bunch of free classes, but the bottom line is getting the people trained. And if you think you're doing it by just being a video guy, that's not going to work, because down the line, God forbid, somebody's going to get hurt or worse, and then your agency is really going to be paying for it.
Yeah,
And but it's upon us, as we say, the grunts in the suit and in the seat, so to speak, to go out and get things on our own. If it's not given to us, we got to show the initiative to go out there and get stuff like we did. So
yeah. You got to take some personal accountability for your skill set. And if you came out of a class not feeling like you really understood something, you should be going back to your agency and getting with the people on your team and saying, hey, I really struggled with this. Can
right,
you help me with this? And if you can't, is there a class that you know if I can take? Or is there somewhere I can go? Is there an online uh, resource? One of the ones being like HazMat Group 2, where I can just go in there and I can ask questions on Facebook.
right,
Um, but it's really incumbent upon asking that question. We have to do that self reflection as a fire service, as an emergency response. Agencies need to do it and ask, you're either going to invest on the front end or you're going to pay on the back end.
that's exactly it.
And like
That's
you said,
exactly
whether it's a
it.
lawsuit or a workers' compensation claim because
Right,
someone gets hurt because they're not adequately trained, or just the loss in commerce because you have a scene that is
yeah,
impacted for a longer period of time than it would be with adequately trained personnel.
right.
because
Right.
you have people that are trying to figure it out as they go. They're like like uh, like our friends say when they're talking about the EV batteries, they're building the plane as they're flying it.
Right.
We shouldn't be doing this on hazmat scenes. The
Exactly.
plane should be built, it should be tested, and it should be in production. We
Right.
shouldn't be making it up as we go. There's always going to be those unique situations where, like, I've never seen this type of leak before. What do we
Right.
have that can fix? Those are unique, but the straightforward, how do I use this piece of equipment?
Yeah.
That shouldn't be something that in the parking lot on a call we're having to review with technicians before they go down range.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Derek, I think this was a pretty good discussion, and if we might have to do a part two of this because we could
Maybe.
go on for a little bit longer.
Oh, I can definitely talk.
We both can. But thanks to everybody for listening. And this is just something that Derek and I have been talking about that we wanted to address because, as I said, we're coming across people in our travels that um, they're literally in some cases begging us to do more training with them because they're not getting it elsewhere. And we sat and thought about it and we're like, well, where's the problem? What's been going on? And it comes back to the different levels of training, the different types of training, no consistency in hours, and the list goes on and on and on. So I think we'll be doing a part two to this. So hopefully this answers some questions. Before we go, I just want to run by a couple websites for you guys to check out, and this might help you with some of those. The Hazmat Guys Facebook and web page. Our good friends Bobby and Mike, FDNY Hazmat One. They've got 300 plus episodes of hazardous materials talk, about 30-minute podcasts each. The Hazmat Guys Roundtable, you can find the first Tuesday of every month. Bobby, Mike, myself, and our good friend Jay Z from Arizona host a live show, 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, the first Tuesday of every month. You can catch that on YouTube. Hazmat Group 2, Hazmatter Group, and Common Sense Hazmat, all on Facebook. Great resources for all of us, for all of you. And we're always learning ourselves, as is our company motto: when you're through learning, you're through. So, with that, Derek, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And everybody stay safe.